Happy week 11. So we will continue this week to consider tangential kinds of questions that crop up from the three readings. So we have Assimilation by Eugene Gloria or Eugene Gloria. Mrs. Dutta Writes a Letter by Chitra Divakaruni. Village by Estella Portillo Tremblay. So one poem, two stories. And we will just bring up some sort of tangential questions related to these three readings that maybe will help you crack into them in a different way or make them more memorable to you over the long term. So we'll continue to explore questions of how the readings might affect you personally, but also just the issues of diverse cultures and reading the work of writers from a post-colonial world, and the issue brought up in the title of the first work this week, assimilation. So we've noticed that in different forms throughout some of the stories this term, but this poem really directly brings the idea of assimilation to the fore. So here I am addressing the text. And there's one line the narrator has that kind of sums up. The narrator is talking about being, quote, marked by experience of not being part of the whole in a playground full of white kids. And this is exemplified a bit more in the poem through looking at the different lunches. Just even the poem talks about lunch pails. When I was growing up, it was lunch boxes. For people today who bring their lunches, it could be a bag, whatever. But the idea of even like what you bring your food in matters and marks you as different. Not even to mention the food that's inside the lunch container is a real indicator of home culture in a way that can make a young person feel really like they don't belong. So I just wanted to show you one little breakdown. In this article in the Washington Post, there's just a breakdown that I found kind of interesting when they talk about assimilation. They're discussing specifically Mexican immigrants in Omaha, but they are kind of pulling from that to note that in immigrant communities across the country, there's a process often referred to as segmented assimilation, in which immigrants follow different paths as they incorporate into U.S. society. So one way that we're kind of used to seeing this is the classic American ideal of blending in and shooting for the middle class. So an idea that you're kind of ironing out everything from the home culture if you're an immigrant to this country and you're trying to just get fully Americanized. And this often means that we choose that sometimes the immigrants end up choosing the worst of Americanization in terms of becoming very consumeristic, where we often see like second generation or children of immigrants where it's like they want the right clothes, they want the right shoes to make them look more American. So sometimes the assimilation comes at kind of the expense of values in a way. So there's that ideal. I mean, you will hear a lot of Americans whose own ancestors came from another country, usually, unless they're Native American, so with their own immigrant backgrounds, you'll often hear contemporary Americans saying that these people who come here should try to be more like, they should try to fit in. And that's problematic in a lot of ways, but that definitely has become sort of the classic American ideal for assimilation. Assimilation. Oh boy, if you say the word over too many times, you guys, I'll stop. Okay, so another possible way that we see immigrants assimilating is into a kind of downward assimilation, into an adversarial underclass. So this is when you see people who have come from another country who are living, sometimes you'll have multiple families in one apartment. Sometimes you'll have, like someone who is a doctor in another country or a respected professional. When they come to the United States, what happens is they end up being the house cleaner or getting a job working on like a landscape crew or something. And so there is this sort of feel of who and what they were in their home country takes a hit when it comes here as they assimilate. And then there's another option that there is a buffered integration into immigrant enclaves. So you might see like in the Twin Cities in St. Paul, for example, there's a really huge population of Somalis. And if you know the right places, in St. Paul, you can go and enjoy the restaurants, the coffee shops, etc. of Somali immigrants, because they live sort of in a cluster, and there are entire neighborhoods and entire parts of the city, or stretches of buildings where you'll know, okay, I can go here and get the great Somali stuff. So it's there's this idea that often, when you go to the new country as an immigrant, you look for people who are from your same home country, because it feels comfortable and because they can help get you set up in your new life. So the idea of immigrant enclaves is another thing I wanted to kind of point out when we're talking about assimilation. I don't know why it's so hard. I'm not going to reshoot this whole thing either, because I'm never going to be able to talk better today. I feel it. I'm sorry. Okay, but I do like this phrase right here, the ambivalence of assimilation. So let's kind of consider that in your question for the week. My husband just came in the room and I told him I'm struggling to say assimilation. I think it's because I also said Americanization, and now I want to say assimilization. Anyhow, he made me say it about 4 times slowly, repeating after him. Assimilation. So the final line in the poem, in the book, leaves us with an image. And weeks passed while the scattered rice beneath the length of the red painted bench blackened with the schoolyard's dirt. And so that image kind of suggests like the rice is representative of the home culture, and it's basically been like discarded and forgotten underneath the bench, and it's just getting kind of grimy, and as it's probably slowly disintegrating, it's just feeling pretty dirty. So that raises another kind of angle about assimilation and what it does to the people who are affected by it. So instead of asking you personal questions about assimilation this week, I mean, we all, throughout our lives, no matter where we're from, where we live, where we grow up, we all have to assimilate in certain ways when we go to school and so on. But it's much more marked when you are an immigrant who's come to live in a new place. So my question is more just for you, just food for thought kind of question for you, not so much about your own personal life necessarily, unless you are an immigrant who has lived this, and then you would have a lot of nuance to your responses here. Conforming to a different culture is never easy, often causing ambivalence in those affected. What institutions and forces pressure newcomers in the U.S. to shed their home cultures? What are the personal costs of assimilation? So as noted, schools really force all students to assimilate in terms of behaviors because there's sort of set expectations. But we see in the poem how assimilation even happens through, at lunchtime through the food. And so we could say schools are one. Oh, I just saw I have a typo in institutions too. Are we at the point with this video where we're like, Jocelyn, just give it up, go back, fix all the things? I don't know. Let's keep it real. I feel like that's a little bit more interesting. So as I've typed here, what institutions and forces pressure newcomers? So we've got schools. I think a lot of people, I'm sure you've heard about this in your own life, during the immigration waves of like the late 1800s and even early 1900s, when a lot of European immigrants were going through Ellis Island, there were involuntary name changes that took place. So we could say that immigration officials at places like Ellis Island are one of the forces that pressured newcomers to shed their home cultures simply by transcribing the name they were told in a way that was, nothing like what the actual name was back home. So a lot of surnames underwent dramatic change when a person was in Ellis Island and having someone fill out the paperwork for them. When you look at my surname, there's evidence that it didn't always happen that way, though, because Pelaja or Pilaya in Finnish, which means mountain ash tree or rowan tree, the tree with all the little orange berries that you see all over Duluth and in Scandinavian countries. That's my name is actually a place. It's a farm where my family came from in Finland. So miraculously, Pihlaja made it through Ellis Island intact, but a lot of people's family names changed. They became Americanized in that moment of recording them on the paperwork. So I think it's just interesting to think of all the different forces, institutions that, or as I like to say, institutions that force, newcomers to our country to adapt and to erase parts of themselves. And so what's the personal cost of that? Well, we see from the tone of the poem this week in Assimilation that it can be, there's something a little almost melancholy or plaintive about the tone of that poem, a little bit of an aw shucks feeling as this kid realizes he just wants to fit in. He doesn't want people to notice him as being different. He wants his mom to make him the lunch that's the bread cut in the triangles like everybody else has. So there's always a feeling of loss, right? Anyhow, just food for thought as you read news stories or you hear political discussions or you hear elected officials saying things. Whenever we hear these discussions, it's good to go beyond kind of the, everyone should be the same, because you don't need to melt into this pot that is the United States. What if we're a mosaic where everyone keeps distinct edges and we all line up into a beautiful overall picture? How about that one? Okay, I got to start talking faster because I already took up a lot of minutes in this video just with the first question. So come on, you guys, let's get clicking here. So for the second story this week, Mrs. Dutta writes a letter. We see an older woman who's come from India, and she's living with her son and daughter-in-law and her grandkids, and it's supposed to be one big happy extended family, as would be the way in India, all living together. And Mrs. Dutta thinks that she can be of help, but as it turns out, she's an embarrassment. The neighbors complain about the way she hangs her laundry. She finds a lot to object to because, again, her son and his wife have become pretty Americanized. And Shaimali is the name of the daughter-in-law, but they just call her Molly. And she can't believe, Mrs. Dutta can't believe things like instead of putting sugar in the tea or the coffee, they put these chemical powders. So we're talking about your Splendas and your Equals, friends. And, there's all sorts of things that are appalling to her. And at the same time, the stress it's putting on her son and his wife and their marriage. She disapproves a bit of her grandkids because they just sit in front of the TV all day. And so we see a huge clash of cultures to the point where every person in that house is unhappy, but their family, right? Their family. And we love family. So instead of asking a question for this one, I've made a statement. Do you have thoughts? You want to agree? You want to disagree? Just roll that over in your mind while you're doing something besides sitting in front of the television. Go for a run and consider this. How about this statement? People are sometimes better off without their families. Can it be so? In what instances? Have you witnessed it in your own life? Sometimes an estrangement can be a healthy thing. I'm not saying that Mrs. Dutta is going to be estranged from her family, but I think she's going to exit their house and head back to her old life with some great relief. And so I think you could consider all the ways, even in the United States, when there aren't sort of clashes of culture going on within a household, what are some instances of when people make a decision to put some distance between themselves and their families? And, what are the effects of that? Something to consider. I'm being quiet now. And in the third story this week, Village, we have an American soldier named Rico. He is Mexican heritage, and that plays a huge role in his actions in the story. So he is the Vietnam War, and he's representing the United States, and he and his squadron, excuse me if my terminology is wrong, are on the verge of massacring a village of innocent citizens, which happened quite a bit during the Vietnam War. And because their commander, their sergeant, is about to give the order to just unleash fire and just mow the place down pretty much. And so Rico opts to, I would say, at least in my opinion, make a very difficult moral choice, the right choice, and he shoots the sergeant in the arm. So he basically disrupts the situation just before the massacre is about to happen. So to me, Rico is a hero. And I think we have to ask ourselves, if to what extent does Rico's heritage, his experience of growing up as a Mexican in the United States, as a person of color in a majority white country, to what extent does that inform his decision in that moment in Vietnam? So basically, all of these little videos are about this idea of developing empathy. What we see in Rico in that real crisis moment is we see him draw upon empathy to consider those villagers inside their homes as important individuals whose lives are worth saving, even in a time of war. And so I think it's a great demonstration of how empathy can have massive impacts. So I would just say for you, maybe you can't think of any examples off the top of your head, but again, when you're out for a run, when you're shoveling snow this winter, clearly I need to go have a snack. Blood sugar low today. I don't know. Anyhow, think, when you're shoveling snow this winter, have you ever had moments where, let's say you've lived something, so you have experience with it, like the heartache of getting dumped, and therefore when your best friend gets dumped, you have helpful things to say about feeling better because you are able to draw from your own lived experience and share those feelings and that knowledge with the people around you in a way that has positive effects. So have you ever been able to take some empathy and have it help you make a choice or take some action that has some actual positive ramifications? Something for you to consider. I really should stop talking now. I feel like I've clunked my way through this entire video. Thank you for hanging in there till the end if you've made it this far. We'll see you next time, Kay. All right, go get a snack too, all right?